Okay, let's do a quick 10-minute rundown of the biggest threat that America faces from China. This is a condensed version of the 1 hour live that I just finished. And if you don't have time to watch the 1 hour live, these 10-minute versions are almost all the same information, just with a lot less of the filler. And so we'll talk about basically, we started by talking about, do you recall during World War II how there was rationing of all sorts of things, food, fuel, tires? There was drives to go pick up scrap metal and take it and turn it in. There were, seriously curtailing the purchase of electronics and refrigerators and things like that, because the entire economy was a wartime economy and had been mobilized to help America win World War II. People were encouraged to grow gardens, and people were encouraged to turn in to go without stockings, and even make a different type of clothing that didn't use as many buttons and things like that, because even textiles were rationed and prioritized for military use. And my question was, do you think Americans would be willing to go through that kind of hardship and level of restriction today if America faced a war overseas? And I'm a little skeptical. I'm not sure about that. But whether or not you think Americans would be willing to do it, the Chinese people are doing it right now, and they're doing it against their will in many cases. I mean, there are a lot of people in China. The way China works, it's an authoritarian country. The government tells you what you're going to do, and you get to like it. And that's about it. So China is gearing up for war. They are mobilizing their entire economy. They're modernizing their military, expanding greatly, especially in their navy. In the last 5 years, the Chinese have pumped out about 1,500 new ships every year. The United States has built 57 new ships total in the last 5 years, and only 40 something of those are actual Navy ships. The rest are commercial. And so China does not have naval supremacy over the United States yet, but they're rapidly expanding their Navy. They're producing warships at a rate about 3 times that of the United States, including advanced aircraft carriers, nuclear-powered submarines, et cetera, et cetera. They're vastly increasing their air and missile capabilities. The deployment of bombers to the contested islands in the South China Sea and other places like that are ramping up their ability to project power to other places outside of their own country. And their nuclear arsenal is growing by leaps and bounds. There are over 600 nuclear warheads already, and they say that they could reach 1,000 by 2030. That's concerning. They're mobilizing their entire economy, doing what they call strategic stockpiling of reserves like oil, metals, copper, iron, manganese, rare earth metals, things like that, and grain and other food products as well. And that's to help them weather sanctions or supply chain disruptions that could come out of a potential conflict. They're also developing alternative financial systems. They're like the digital renminbi, which would help them reduce their reliance on Western financial networks and counteract any potential sanctions. Now, one area where China is really going full tilt already in terms of war against the West is in the cyber and information war realm. TikTok itself is a cyber war. It's an information war weapon against America. And the Chinese have created a space force, they're called Cyberspace Force, that is dedicated to enhance cyber defense and is conducting offensive military operations, including long-term infiltration strategies where they find or in place things they call zero-day exploits inside American critical infrastructure, dams, bridges, power networks, communications nodes, things like that. And they are able to then target American critical infrastructure in the event of a war. This is something we should be very, very concerned about because it's a foregone conclusion. China already has that stuff in place. It's a kill switch in place in lots of places across the United States, and they could throw the U.S. into chaos, like at the drop of a hat, in case if we end up going to war. They're also doing what they call military civil fusion. That strategy integrates civilian industries with military objectives. So it makes it so that if you're going to build cars in China, you have to be able to very quickly change your factory so that it can crank out armored vehicles or something like that. So that these dual use technologies, the uh, assembly robots and things like that, can all be reprogrammed very quickly to have a military purpose over a civilian purpose. They're also mandating that every new building in China have a bomb shelter, planning ahead for the future. And that they're way ahead of the United States in that. We don't have any bomb shelters in the United States to speak of. And so this is something China is thinking ahead on. They're also building the world's largest military headquarters at over 1,500 acres, 10 times the size of the Pentagon, much of it deep, deep underground outside of Beijing. So they're also developing legal justifications and frameworks for supporting any potential military action they would take in the future, especially concerning Taiwan. So they're indeed gearing up for future conflict, but they're facing real demographic challenges that could hamper or even derail China's ability to sustain a major war effort. So let's talk about some of those challenges they face now. Number one is their property sector crisis. Major developers in China like Evergrande and Country Garden have already defaulted. They have perhaps 3 times the number of housing units in China than they have people. Real estate represents about a third of their entire GDP. So as that implodes, it affects everything from local governments to consumer confidence to the CCP's ability to fund their largest army in the world, 2 million men under arms. The local governments used to get all of their revenue from the property sector through taxes and sales taxes, things like that, when properties were built in their areas. But as that has collapsed, the local governments have had to borrow a bunch of money, and it's estimated that the local debt that is hidden in China is over $10 trillion right now. And that could easily trigger a mass default, some kind of massive financial crisis. Of course, China's growth as a country is slowing. They had double-digit rates in the past of growth, but now it's 3 to 4% and fading. The unemployment rate is exceedingly high. They quit publishing the numbers not back in 2023, I think, because it just got so bad. But when they quit, the last numbers that they published, the youth unemployment rate was over 20%. Of course, the sanctions and the sort of adversarial relationship between China and the Western world has led to Western businesses divesting themselves from China, decoupling from China, de-risking, getting, because it's too risky to do business in China. And so a lot of foreign direct investment is just disappearing. It's drying up in China. And that's really bad. China's infrastructure is seriously aging. Uh, the last time they updated any of their roads, bridges, critical infrastructure, power networks was in the early 2000s. So that's getting pretty old. China is heavily dependent on coal and oil imports to fund, to fuel their economy. And that means that they are not going to be able to continue uh, cranking stuff out if we get into a crisis, some kind of war or something, because it would be fairly easy to cut off their flow of coal and oil. So that's a vulnerability on the part of China. They also face major demographic headwinds, so to speak. They have a massive population decline. Their population started shrinking in 2023 for the first time in more than 60 years. Their fertility rate is about half of the replacement level. They're rapidly aging. More than 30% of China's population will be over 60 by 2035. That's a huge drain on productivity, healthcare, pensions. Uh, the workforce that's working to pay for all the retired people is shrinking, and the number of retired people is growing. That's a huge problem. Their stupid one-child policy made it so that there are 30 million more men in China than there are women. That's a breeding issue right there. And it's also a stability issue, because all those single men tend to be increase the chances of social instability. So all of these challenges China is facing could hamper its efforts to prepare for war with the West, but it could also incentivize China to go to war sooner, because it perceives that it's got a window of time where it could actually successfully prosecute a war, but that window is closing. And so China may go for Taiwan as early as this year, but most experts believe that they'll try in 2027 or early 2028, depending on the weather. So these internal pressures that China is facing, as well as Xi Jinping's ego wanting to build a legacy for himself, make it you can decide for yourself whether or not the United States is prepared for war with China. I'm skeptical. But one thing is for certain: China is preparing for war with the West. And they have a fair to middling shot of pulling it off if they do it. So, something to keep in mind with your own preparations as you go through these fraught economic times. All right. Thank you for watching. I appreciate you. Please go to chuckholton.com. Make sure that you like this podcast here on YouTube. And if you sign up as a supporter over at chuckholton.com, you get lots of extra content, books and movies and articles and things like that. And you get to support us in our work and make sure that we stay on the air. So thank you for watching. We'll see you again next time. Take care.